Perfect. Thanks. Thanks again for being here. My name is Evan. For those of you who don't know me, there might be a couple new people joining us online. I am based in Baltimore, Maryland, host of the Baltimore Admin Group community group. I got my obligatory sports teams logos up here. Myself and actually Jabari is guest saxophone player from time to time in a band called Brew Crew. And if you're coming to the October 29th event down in DC, we're actually the surprise band. So a little heads up if you've seen that posting go live today. I first logged into Salesforce in 2012. I was a accidental admin at a nonprofit. They gave everybody admin rights. So I found myself quickly figuring out how to make Salesforce work for me. 2015, I got my first full-time Salesforce admin role. 2017, I did my first presentation at Dreamforce. I think I presented at this group or some iteration of it, and then quickly found myself at Dreamforce doing a presentation on report types. And since then, I've been presenting all over the world at various streaming events and user group meetings and all kinds of stuff. 2019, I teamed up with Aaron Creer to create reportforce.blog. That's where we post all of our nerdy report solutions and stuff that we figured out. 2020, during the pandemic, I went out on my own and started my own consulting firm. So up until this point, I had been at nonprofits, I had been at for-profit organizations in a Salesforce-ish role, typically administrator. Sometimes it felt like internal consultant. Now that I came out on my own, I'm like, oh, I already have been doing all of these skills. I earned the application architect certification shortly thereafter. 2022 is when I formally teamed up with Jabari and Mike, who's not here tonight, to be co-leader of this Baltimore admin group. I also started co-organizing the Mid-Atlantic Dreaming event. So that's a dreaming event, like probably have a local one near you. This one's hosted in Philly. That's the closest one to the Baltimore, DC area. So I've been helping them out for the last couple of years. And most recently, I was inducted into the Salesforce MVP class of 2025. So that's been very exciting. But enough about me. Today, we're going to talk about this hackathon challenge. So quick agenda. I'm going to talk about what was the challenge. If you missed the whole thing, I'll go through a little bit of sort of what happened on LinkedIn. I'll show you how it was configured. And then we'll get into several lessons that I learned from this challenge. And I do want to leave time for Q&A. If you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. I have Jabari watching the chat, so he can read that out. You can also come off mute. I have brought all this audio stuff to make sure that anybody online who wants to say something, the whole room can hear you. So feel free to interrupt me at any point. The whole point of this is to be able to talk about this stuff, get your questions answered. Maybe there's other experts, I hope, that are joining us online that can weigh in where I might not have all of the answers. All right. What prompted all of this? So I can give you a little bit of the backstory. April of 2023, I was in the solo nonprofit Salesforce consultants Slack space. And there was a question asked that gets asked every so often. And it's, what form tool are you using to support your nonprofits? And everybody was going back and forth on, I use Form Assembly, I use Form Titan, I use this, I do that, but it's too expensive and they're raising their price and it doesn't integrate right and all these ins and outs. And I read through this whole thread and nobody had mentioned using ScreenFlows. So I chimed in and said, actually, I've been using ScreenFlows on Experience Cloud sites for my nonprofit clients. It doesn't cost them anything extra. And it works great. And the backlash I got from that group was, oh, there's no way. There's like, it's way too complicated. There's no way you could possibly set that up for a nonprofit. And I had to put my money where my mouth was. And a month later, I found myself signed up to teach a hands-on training to a nonprofit user group hosted in the UK, where they wanted me to show them how easy is it to set up one of these form tool solutions. And that was sort of the genesis of a presentation that I started delivering at various Dreaming events over the last couple of years as a hands-on training, giving people all the tools and setup config to set up one of these form solution tools. In April of 2024, so a little bit over a year ago, maybe a year and a half, there was this conversation about security for public screen flows and how does the guest user, what permissions do they have? And Andy Utkin, who's based down in Florida, had put together a panel where he brought in a couple experts and a couple people from the community to have a conversation about digital experience security. This is one of the hyperlinks I have. There's a bunch throughout this presentation. I will have the QR code and I put it in the chat and I can put it in the chat again, but if you want to watch that recording, that was sort of the first round of trying to get some of these questions answered. We've had a couple people who are CTAs. We had people who worked at Salesforce. We were drilling them with various questions, trying to understand, is there a security risk for having these public screen flows with the guest user? Like, what risk does that mean for data that lives in that Salesforce work? Kind of got a fuzzy answer. We had a conversation for sure, but I really wasn't satisfied with what do I need to really be concerned about here. It did help me fine tune some of the solutions that I had been building, and definitely I overhauled my hands-on training to try to have more of a mindset for security. I continued that. I've done that like updated version of that hands-on training. I actually did one in Colombia for this group last November. Was actually the first time I did it with the security component added to it. And then most recently, beginning of September, I did the same session at Northeast Streaming. And a woman towards the end during the Q&A flat out asked, have you done penetration testing on a solution like this? And I sort of gave her a quick spiel of what, how I put this together, the security mindset that I try to have, especially once I overhauled it. But I had to tell her, no, like I've never tried to hack one of these sites. So I tried to go hack my own site. So I'll get this out of the way. Matt Myers, who was one of the CTAs who was on our panel, he works for Easy Protect. It's his company. And one of the things that he highlights is how to hack your own Experience Cloud site. This is a YouTube video where he walks you through how to do it. I watched that video on September 5th. It was the day after Northeast Streaming. And I paused it every 10 seconds and tried to follow along what he was doing to try to hack the playground that I had set up for Northeast Streaming. Followed all of his steps, and I was not able to get contact details out of that board. And I was like, that's helpful. This is what Matt said. I've definitely buttoned up some of the obvious security holes, but just because I can't hack it doesn't mean it's not possible to do. So being frustrated of this 2-year-long question of, is there a problem with what I'm doing? I went and made a couple tweaks to that Trailhead Playground that I had just built for Northeast Streaming. And then I published a post on LinkedIn offering a $2,000 bounty to go hack and get the contact records out of that work. Let me show you what that looked like. Here's the post. I'll get into a little bit of the analytics. It says I will pay $2,000 US, and I had to be very specific. Like now I'm suddenly doing a contest, right? I had to have all the parameters around it's US currency, and I want to, submit the data, you have a deadline, Eastern Daylight Time. And then I wanted people to walk me through how they did what they did, sort of as a learning exercise to understand what is the risk, how did they exploit it, and what can I do to fix it. So here was that form that I linked to. It is literally the Trailhead Playground I had built live at Northeast Streaming to show people how to do a hands-on training. The only thing I did is I made a couple of adjustments to add the same text that I had in my post. The first 3 fields were what I demoed, first name, last name, email. And then the only field I added was this data you extracted, and I wanted it in whatever format you want to give me, comma separated JSON values, whatever. I can show you that flow. So the screen flow this is the whole canvas here. One of the important things that I emphasize, and we'll talk about in the lessons learned, is any of these screen flows that you're making publicly available, you don't want to elevate their context. They need to be running in user context, which ends up being the default if you don't select anything in this drop-down menu. That's one of the things that we'll touch on. on this screen, you'll notice, or in this flow, there is no DML elements. There are no pink elements that are actually interacting with the database. So we have a screen where we're collecting information. Here's a little bit of my text. Here's the first name, last name, email. I have some validation on those things. I have this wide open text field for the data you extract. I use an assignment to assign those input values to a response record. One of the things I did in this solution was, instead of trying to integrate directly with contacts or any of your important objects, there's sort of a catch-all place for all of your responses to be in just a custom object. It allows you to have some of that functionality where you might want a record of every submission that came through the form, and you might want to be able to process and do automations to eventually land that data in places that you want in your data architecture. As far as actually committing that data to the database, I run that in a subflow. This subflow, it accepts a record variable of what I defined in that assignment element. And all it's doing is creating that response record. It's a custom object. There's nothing fancy about this flow. Very straightforward, create a record from a record variable. The one thing that is very important is this subflow does run in system context. For this like one-way send of data from the public website into a Salesforce org, you don't actually need to grant sharing access to any records. So this one is set up with sharing, meaning that the guest user can only see records that have explicitly been shared with them. And I'll tell you, there are no sharing rules set up in this org. So nothing is shared with that guest user. They don't even have access to the response record they created as soon as it happens, is what's happening there. I see a number of questions that have popped up in the chat. Anything I need to look at, Jabari?
Lost audio.
Lost audio.
Sorry, I can still hear some people here.
Give me a thumbs up. You can still hear me online.
I can hear you. I think okay. John has his hand up.
Go ahead, John. All right, we'll come back to you, John. You have a question?
Yeah, so you said there was no sharing rule defined, right? But the sharing setting was set to private, or?
Yes, so the org-wide defaults for guest users are private by default.
Oh,
okay. Across the board, every object. That did become standard for Salesforce several releases ago. There was a point where that wasn't always the case. So if you have an older org, I want to say before 2019, it is definitely worth checking. Anything in the last couple of years that the org's been created, it's pretty much guaranteed that all of your external access is going to be private by default for guest users.
But you can set it back to publicly, right?
You can, yeah, you can override that stuff. For this demo, I left all the defaults. It was a Trailhead Playground I had spun up in September. So I was relying on that fact, but definitely, yeah, if you're doing this in your organization, you definitely want to go check those sharing setting defaults for the external access. Any other questions? John, you want to come off mute? Oh, by mistake. No worries. Okay. Talk through the challenge. Here's a little bit about the reach. So I was just a little bit like trying to find an answer. I had posted this on LinkedIn. I posted it in the MVP Slack community. I posted it in the Flow community, and I think on Ohana Slack as well. And there were some comments right away on those posts, but LinkedIn really blew up way more than I could have ever hoped for or imagined. I'm not an influencer by any means. I don't do social media all that much, but I looked through some of like my other posts, which are generally like advertising these events. I've maybe had like 5,000 impressions. So like seeing over 100,000 impressions was just like, whoa, like a lot of people are looking at this. And it was good. Like we were getting lots of people in the Salesforce ecosystem, but also just anybody interested in security. There are a lot of like web security people who were either tagged or somehow got looped into this. And it was fascinating to like watch those conversations happen and to start being connected with some of those people.
top of mind for a lot of people right now.
Absolutely. It was
Okay.
also like coming out, like I didn't plan for this, but
Yeah.
like Salesforce had a couple things in the news about
Yeah.
like leaked credentials and
Yeah.
stuff. So people were already thinking about security, not necessarily in this lens, but it was very topical of the moment over the last month. So that was fascinating to see. I talked through the configuration a little bit, just as a recap. I did set up a custom object. I have an auto-launched flow in system context with sharing enforced. That's actually creating my records. My screen flow runs in user context. So that guest user has no object access. There's no read permission on any object. It doesn't have any sharing rules set up. And that flow where they're sitting on the screen is running in that guest user's context. So via API, that guest user can't do anything. And the way I'm exposing that flow is I've set up a public page on a digital experience site. I'm not making the whole site public. The site is private, but each page has a public private setting. So I just set up a specific page to host this flow and made it public. Happy to answer any other questions about that configuration. So the question you're probably all wondering is, did anyone extract contact data? At first I had the 20 contact records that come with every Trailhead Playground. And I thought somebody might be creative and just like go spin up their own Trailhead Playground and submit the same names. So to prevent that situation, I went through and just changed the names of those 20 contacts to something else. One of the other things I was asking for was contact ID, because that would kind of prove they got it from my organization. A lot of people were betting on this. Nobody was able to extract contact data out of this Salesforce organization. Over the 2-week period with the 100,000 impressions on LinkedIn plus various Slack posts, nobody got it out. There was plenty of other things that people were able to uncover, which I'll go through in the next several slides here. So if you're wondering if anybody got paid, I did not have to pay out my $2,000. Anybody, no contact data was extracted.
How confident did you feel going into it?
I was very confident at first, but after the first like 6 hours, once I saw like how much people were sharing and like tagging in their like hacker buddies, I was like, oh no, what have I done? So one of the first lessons I want to emphasize is don't try this at home. There's definitely way better ways to do a like bug bounty that I learned through all the comments on LinkedIn. So here's a couple quotes that are funny. This feels like a bad idea. Do you own the website? Can you verify ownership? Do you have authority to approve ethical hacking against the website? Can you prove it? You're inviting people to compromise a website that doesn't belong to you. And like, this guy is right. Like, I just have a Trailhead Playground. I don't own it. Like, it's Salesforce technology. Yeah, it definitely comes across as suspicious. So I wouldn't be able to enroll in a bug bounty program because I can't verify ownership, little verification check, none of that. And he's absolutely right. There's no way I could go mess with some of the DNS settings behind this Trailhead Playground. And a couple other people were saying like Salesforce would pay way more if such issues were reported to them directly. So then there was a bit of like, somebody did find something and their reward was either come to me and get $2,000 or go to Salesforce and say, well, this guy's offering $2,000, what are you offering? Okay. There's a bit of that going on, I think, which leads me to think like maybe somebody did extract details and just didn't submit it to me and I wouldn't know, but maybe Salesforce is having a conversation right now and we don't know it. So if that does happen, it'll be fun to see if anything shakes out of that train of thought. Another interesting thing, a couple people were using AI to try to help them. And one guy actually posted like the whole AI conversation that he had from his bot. So told him, I have to stop here. What you've shared is a request to exfiltrate private data in exchange for money. That's a form of hacking data. I was like, I'm going to get in trouble for this for sure. Once I crossed like 50,000 impressions and like people are asking AI to do it. And AI is telling them like, this page is dangerous. This is suspicious. Like, you have to go do a Zoom walkthrough. Like, this is unusual and risky. And I was like, okay, like, I could ever recommend somebody to do anything similar to this, definitely go about it the right way. I didn't know what a bug bounty program was. I'm not in like the web security space really, but that definitely sounds like an avenue where people are already doing this work. And that's sort of what I've learned through this is I'm not the first one to like encourage somebody to try to hack a Salesforce site. They do it themselves. They have these official programs to do it. So I don't want to like inspire any copycats. This is sort of what this first lesson is all about. I definitely want to, if you want to talk to me about it, let's talk about it. But I think there's legitimate ways to do like bug bounty programs that are not just posting on LinkedIn and offering a reward. I did get a couple messages from Salesforce employees. Those conversations are still happening. They were basically willing to go like get access to this Trailhead Playground and sort of verify the configuration. And I'm pretty confident like the way I've set it up is exactly what I think it is, and that's what they're going to tell me. I'm more interested in like people getting creative with trying to find ways into a Salesforce, but we'll see where that conversation goes. So a couple lessons about things I did get right. Understanding those how to run the flow options and flow access. This was verified by Adam White. So using system context in a screen flow, you should do sparingly, if at all. I took that all the way to the extreme, and I don't run a public screen flow in system context. That's always running in user context, which is that guest user, which has virtually no permissions. The only thing they can do is there's a page on the Experience Cloud site that's marked as public, and I have explicitly granted them access to that screen flow. Those are the only two permission related things happening that grant them access. Adam White echoes the using subflows with elevated access to do any DML statements. So get records, update records, create records. If you're doing anything that's manipulating your Salesforce data, you don't want to do that on the same flow as the screen. You want to do it in a subflow where you can elevate the permissions so that in that context, that subflow can go take care of that action, and then it returns you back to the parent flow, which is that screen flow running in user context. So having that separation, those two separate flows, is best practice. It's recommended by Adam White, who's one of the product managers on the Salesforce Flow team. And I have his article linked here. It's from the Architects Salesforce blog, which is hosted on Medium at the moment, and hopefully still will be, or available somewhere. Again, I'll share this deck so everybody has all the links. So the takeaway here is always run your public screen flows in user context, basically no permissions granted. And then that's the only flow you grant access to for that guest user. Those subflows that have elevated permissions, there is no override there. Those flows are not shared explicitly with that guest user profile. That makes sense? I'm getting a lot of blank stares, so let me show you where that lives. When you set up any of your flows, you have this edit access. All right, so I had just walked through the options for how to run your flows, separating your screen flow, making sure it runs in user context, no permissions. If you need to do something that interacts with your data, set that up in a subflow, and you can elevate the permissions for that subflow in that context without actually granting any access.
Yes, are you still recording?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the recording's still going. We talked about this a little bit. So I did not grant any read access to any object for that guest user. I did not create any sharing rules for that guest user. So they only have access to run that one screen flow and to view that one public page on my Experience Cloud site. I see there's a question online. You can come off mute if you want to ask.
So for when you need to attach files, because I'm still hung up on files, would I need to then create some sharing rules for them to be able to do that?
Yeah, so what I would recommend there is all of the database operations you need to do to attach that file to another record. You want to make sure you're executing those in subflows. with the elevated permissions. The one thing you're trying to avoid is giving that screen flow more API access than it needs, because anything you explicitly grant to the guest user, they have API access to do that forever. Even outside of your flow. So as much as we can avoid that, that will be the most secure way to do this, from my understanding at the moment. But if it's something where like you technically can't do it, like you need to grant access on that screen flow, I would do it in a very controlled way that's still giving them like least privilege possible. So maybe you want to like share one record or whatever it is. Just know that like you're taking on that risk by setting up that like pervasive sharing rule or whatever object access you're granting, that persists always with that guest user. So it's definitely something you want to try to avoid as much as you can. Excellent. Mitch Lynch also works for Salesforce. He has a lot of similar things to say about this flow security for your guest users. He has a blog that actually Adam White linked to in his blog. So both of those are good reads if you want to get down the rabbit hole on some of these conversations. So the takeaway here is don't grant object read access to the guest user. Don't create sharing rules for the guest user. You want them operating in a very, they have no eyes into your org standpoint. Anything you're trying to do to take data from that public flow, that form, and put it into your Salesforce org, handle that in a very controlled way in a subflow that grants just enough permissions to allow that to happen. One of the things I also read through this that comes up several times is flows are run server side. So the reason we can do this separation of concerns and have this subflow with elevated permissions is it's running on Salesforce servers, not on the person's browser. Anything you see on the screen is all happening in the browser, that web app, which is a lot more dangerous to be granting people permissions and access to data in that sense. So a little bit of the reason why we can get away with doing this is the fact that when your flow is executing and goes like after a screen, it's all happening on Salesforce servers with whatever data you've sent to it. AKA you've assigned something to a record variable and told it to do something. So lesson 4 is, yeah, everything on a screen element is accessible. So this was a couple comments in the LinkedIn post saying, I had a configuration set up to sort of handle like the deadline in the flow version I was actually using. Let me flip back to that. It's going to make me log in again. So I used a decision, and then I had 2 different text elements on a confirmation screen, and only one of them was showing it. For while this contest was live, it would say, "Thank you for your submission. I'll get back to you." But I had the deadline has passed option where it would tell them, "Sorry, the contest is over." So let me go back to version 4 here.
Evan, you showed us how many times the form was accessed, but how many submissions did you get?
There were, I can pull that up too. I have, yeah, let me get to that in a second. Yeah. So one of the things I had here was 2 different text elements. One of them was this one. It says, "Thanks for helping us understand. I'll get back to you." And I had this deadline passed variable, just checking to see if that's true or not. So if it's not true, show this message. Once the contest was over, show this message. And what this person was saying is because all of that's happening on the screen flow, that deadline passed is the outcome of my decision. They had access to go find all of that stuff. They saw this deadline passed outcome. They saw the message that was hidden on the screen. It sort of reinforces the fact that your screen flow, everything in that screen flow is running in that person's browser. So they have access to go inspect and find these hidden things behind the scenes. They can see variables that are being referenced. And he made a good point here that if you're trying to use that for anything you're hoping to be secure, it really isn't. So he was saying in a different context, if you call that variable is contact in EU, you'd expose, and you're exposing different logic for EU contacts versus not. Like somebody will be able to go figure that out and unhide all the stuff that you have hidden on your page for their scenario. All the validation error messages can be accessed. So one of the submissions I got just sort of listed out like, please enter a valid email, like enter a number that's valid, like your text is too long. All the standard error messages that Salesforce has for inputs on the flow screen, they can get to all of that. I don't think that's all that much to be worried about, but it just reinforces that everything that's configured in a screen element is accessible in the browser. Big takeaway here is conditional visibility does not provide security. So if you're trying to hide something and you want like two different things to show up on the screen based on something, you got to think about that. Don't try to put it all on one screen and use conditional visibility to do it, knowing that like anybody who knows what they're doing in the browser can go access that stuff. So you might want to use separate flows entirely. I haven't tested this variation, but maybe even having two separate paths. I don't know if you could go access the other screen. I know you might be able to see the decision that was made to go down one path versus the other, but conditional visibility does not provide security on its own. Any questions on that?
So technically, they can access every property of the variable, right?
Yeah,
Like on the variable of any component, right?
yeah,
So if we will put something into the description, they can like technically read it, right?
yeah. I'm going as broad as possible. Like everything you see on that screen flow canvas, just assume it's accessible. Lesson 5, details about the guest user record are accessible. And I kind of knew this and suspected this would be the case. A lot of people were submitting like, here's all the system fields for that guest user, like last modified date, the name, system mod stamp. I'm like, okay, but what are you going to do with that? Right? Nobody was able to use that to gain any other access. They would just tell me like, I know your session ID. Oh, okay. Now what? Like, so that was funny. There was also one person sent all the metadata details about every field on the user object. And that doesn't really prove they got it from my org. That was so vanilla that they could have got that from everywhere. But it was literally like about me, the alias, the username. And it wasn't the values in any of those fields. It was just all the metadata about like, this is a text field. It accepts this amount of text. It can be this long. It's mutable, like all the like database level metadata details. It did make me nervous enough that I'll say, don't put any sensitive details on the guest user record. There are a couple fields like name, and if you have a description or something that like, if you put anything in there, just assume that's public. A lot of times these guest users are named after your organization, or it's something, it's generally public knowledge anyways, but I do want to caution, don't put any sensitive details on that guest user record, because a lot of that stuff can be accessed through the browser. Lesson 6, details about the org and the flow are accessible. So along the same lines, we're able to find the org domain, the org ID, the network ID, the site ID, a lot of stuff that identifies this Trailhead Playground in this case, but it would be your Salesforce org. There's a lot of API configuration stuff. So it tells you if this is Aura versus LWC, what app you're on, the server domain. So it's essentially your my domain name. And there's also information about the flow. So they could find the flow name, the label, API version, the global unique ID, a lot of that stuff, interview status, which is always going to be running if they're running a screen flow. But a lot of that stuff is accessible. What are people going to do with it? I'm not totally sure. I also don't know how to do anything different about this. So I don't have any takeaway that like we can control. this might be something Salesforce wants to address, and I'm happy to have like follow-up conversations and share what people found. To see if Salesforce wants to do anything to lock some of that stuff down. Any thoughts here?
When you talk about this being exposed, Evan, are you just saying like, if Chrome is your browser and you come in and you look at the source, it's exposed at that level, or are you talking about digging deeper beyond that?
Yeah, I think the entry point for what people are doing to get at some of this data is going through the browser and some like, what do they call it? Burp Suite tools to like ping the network or whatever is happening there to try to extract anything they can get
See what
out of it.
response I can get.
See what
Yeah.
responses they get. So it's all stuff that's in the browser or that comes back when Flow navigates to the next screen and like, is sending information back. Are the stuff that people are finding there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thanks.
This one was interesting. So somebody had posted, there's a couple like vulnerabilities. I won't get into too many details, but as an example, I just created a case and here's the ID. It's in your org. And I was like, whoa, okay. So I went and checked. Sure enough, that case exists, which was fascinating. And that same person, a few minutes later, also put in a lead record. And I had a follow-up chat with them in LinkedIn messages, say like, what is going on here? And they're like, well, it's sort of something that comes with Aura. There's a couple methods that at least work on case and lead. And it's sort of been a known thing for a long time. There's not a lot of documentation behind it, but this person knew enough to like go create a case and they could get back their own case ID, which was fascinating. I don't know what to do about that one either. Like I did not grant any access to cases. I didn't grant any access to leads, so I don't know what else I can take away. It sounds like there's some standard Aura method that allows people to do this if you have a digital experience site set up. Part of me understands maybe why this happens is that's generally the use case for these sites is you're going to have people create lead records or you're going to have them create cases in like a customer support context. So for whatever reason, those permissions are somehow available and baked in, and there's methods that allow these things to happen. Jody or Dodie, I see you grimacing. Are you okay?
Yes, I'm just imagining someone maxing out your data space with cases and leads.
Yeah. Yeah, so in that sense, if you need to like go turn stuff off, like I don't know, figure out a way to, I don't know if you just unpublish your site entirely, if that's an option, or make it private so people have to log in. A great follow-up thing to figure out like what to do if somebody's doing this. I don't totally understand the Aura method that is being tampered with here. I just watched it happen and know that like I didn't grant any access and this person was able to create a case and one lead. They were nice enough not to flood my org with a ton of stuff.
So what's the Aura component that they were able to access it through?
I don't know if it's an Aura component. I think they mentioned it was an Aura method, which is
And
some,
is that just accessible with any kind of flow?
I don't know if it's Flow, but I know I set up an Aura Experience Cloud site.
Oh, okay.
Be a method that's just baked in and available in that sense.
So Evan, the lead that they created or the case that they created, what did it use you as a creator or what basically like who was the last created by, last modified by? So essentially your credentials, sort of?
Yeah, I mean, it's not even the guest user. I mean, that makes sense because anything the guest user creates, you specify some other user to be the record creator and owner. So that was
Yeah.
in that scenario, and that carried through here.
Okay.
So it does show up that I created the case on September 8th.
Okay.
Then there's a couple of suggestions in the chat about web to lead and case settings.
Say it again?
There's a couple of suggestions in the chat about web to case and web to lead settings.
Web to case. Oh, okay. Web to lead, web to case ability. That's, yeah, that's a big follow-up. I'll definitely go check that out after this and see if there's a setting I could turn off there. That makes a lot of sense too. So yeah, there's some default for like allow a lead or a case to be created.
There was a web to lead vulnerability in Agent Force that was exposed. They just closed. Like, it might be related to that, potentially.
Yeah, well, first you have to enable it, right?
Yeah.
And-
Yeah.
Without enabling how they were able to create a case. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for calling that out in the chat. I'll definitely take a look. Lesson 8, a lot of people tried to figure out if any Apex was exposed because that felt like an obvious loophole for them. Now, for what I configured, I didn't use any Apex classes, but if you were to use Apex to do anything, especially if you're using like an unofficial SF component that has Apex classes, all of the security for those Apex classes is configured in each class. So you have to explicitly grant access to an Apex class for it to run. That whole concept in flows where I can run a screen flow in user context and then have a subflow run with elevated permissions, that doesn't happen in Apex. Everything is explicitly, you have to share access to that class via the API, which means it persists outside the context of your flow. And what people were looking for was there any Apex classes set up that way so they could go try to like pass it different inputs or maybe get its outputs and mess with it that way. Because I didn't have any Apex classes, that really wasn't applicable in this scenario. But a lot of people were trying to go that route, that angle to get at stuff. It does bring a good point that if you are using Apex classes for anything that powers your public screen flow experience, have a trusted developer review those classes from a security perspective to make sure there's nothing that could be exploited there. Ideally, you would avoid it altogether, like I did, but if you have to do something, just understand you're taking on that additional risk by sharing those classes with that guest user. Any thoughts there? The last one I'll get into is to stay vigilant. Just because we're reviewing this today, like technology is changing so fast, the next release, there's people poking at this stuff all the time. Security's in the news a lot, and there's always new experiments people are doing. There's a couple links I have here where earlier this year, there was a 0-day exploit found in one of the standard Aura controllers. Maybe that's the same thing that I suffered from where somebody could create that leader case. That's a fascinating article if you want to read through that. Salesforce has also done their own in-depth security articles to talk about the measures they've taken to make sure that their solutions are secure. So it's something that's part of all of our responsibility to be aware of these things and look into them. So review those release notes. There are certain release updates that a lot of times are done for security reasons. It's generally a step in the right direction. So if you have any that are pending, I would encourage you to go look at those, test them out, see if you can turn them on. Salesforce is trying to help us out in this sense by rolling in some of these security updates. There is one coming out where you have to grant explicit access to all flows for all users. They have started saying this was going to happen in like 2025, and now it's winter 26 is the latest. Might get pushed again, but that's on the horizon. There's a release update for that, where you'll have to make sure you've explicitly granted all of your users access to run flows. It's via that edit access option I was showing you earlier. Any questions on that? if there are none, I will put up this slide. If you have any other questions about security, screen flows, public experience cloud site, feel free to ask, come off mute if you're online. I have the QR code with the link to this slide deck. So if you want to get all those links, you can access them that way. That's publicly available. What questions do you have?
Do you report the case and lead thing to Salesforce, or something they're already aware of that vulnerability, the world vulnerability?
I have not, because I didn't even know what to poke at. I do have an email thread with one Salesforce employee, so I can definitely follow up with them about that. Dodie did ask how many submissions did I get, so let me show you that. So there's one test, and then the last one is numbered just over 6,000. Now there is a caveat here where someone did get creative and like set up a script to just hit my form thousands of times. So I did have to go stop them from doing that. I'll show you what I did. I just got lucky essentially. Version 2. So yeah, here was version 1. This is what I demoed at Northeast Dreamin'. A lot of people were saying I could use a reCAPTCHA to help with this. There was a good LinkedIn comment that said, like, from the options available, even if I did implement that, there's nothing stopping a hacker who knows what they're doing from getting around those checkbox things. It's not running server side, was the general thing that I gleaned from that. The ones available from Google, they're all running in the browser, and like they can help validate a little bit, but they're not a stopgap totally. Here's the updated create response. I just put in a decision that said, hey, if it's this person's email, just don't create a response record. There was like a couple thousand that all had the same email, so I just used that to filter them out. And they didn't start it back up again, so I just kept an eye on it. I was putting responses into the recycle bin, knowing that there's a 15-day time frame, and then I just went into the, what did I use? Workbench.com, and I exported all the response records, including the recycle bin, to get everything out, just so I have a copy of it. I have other conversations with Salesforce. That was the only like other thing people kept bringing up, was like the fact that they can't get contact records doesn't mean we've solved all the security concerns. Like there's definitely scripts and like denial of service attacks and like other things to be aware of. That wasn't really in scope for like the challenge as I defined it, but certainly that would be like a version 2, or if like further exploration around this is to go figure out what else you can do to make sure bad actors don't abuse your Salesforce technology. A lot of people were submitting these records. We're just doing it to get information from the response. Some people were trying to put queries right into these fields. None of that worked. But for the people who did find some information, like this person knows the full URL for the instance. There's a lot of interesting things that came through here. Yeah, just over 6,000, including all the spam tag stuff. I think at this point there's less than 1,000 that I actually kept that weren't just totally garbage. Any other questions?
Why did you specify contacts specifically?
Yeah, that feels to me like worst case scenario. I wanted people to get data from an object they don't have access to. And I thought that if they could get contact data, that would be the worst, right? That's PII, that's your customer database. So that's where I started. And because I kind of threw this together, that was sort of an easy avenue to test that theory.
Well, I was just so impressed at the banter that was happening, and that it seemed like you were getting responses from serious hackers. And I know that's not your area of expertise, but you were kind of keeping up with all of the things they were throwing at you.
Oh, I was sweating, don't worry. It was a very, every morning I would wake up and be like, I don't know, somebody might have taken down my challenge by now, and I would like log in, it would still be there. There were some people who were trying to like, I just got very paranoid, like, are people gonna start trying like social engineering attacks on me? Like, I was suspicious of every email for those 2-week periods, like, I don't recommend doing this, is the moral. It will throw you for an anxiety loop, feeling like everyone's coming after you. Any other questions in our last few minutes here?
Yeah, another one.
What am I gonna do with the $2,000? I'm gonna keep it in my bank account.
Yeah.
That's the plan for now. There are a couple people who gave some really good insights, so I might consider like sending a little bonus to people. Like a couple people wanted like $100 for what they found, so I might total that up and
Runners up.
yeah, hand out some consolation prizes. Is there a recapture option for screen flows? John asked. There's a couple options. Salesforce has a pretty good document on their digital experience page about how to do that. They're doing it from a standpoint of you have a record on a page and you can set up reCAPTCHA for that. What they don't have is the ability to put a reCAPTCHA on a screen flow. For that, I found Unofficial SF has a link to a GitHub repository that has a Google reCAPTCHA component that you can install. I have that for some of my clients. It does tend to slow people down, but if you really wanted to, from what I understand, somebody who knows what they're doing can get around those reCAPTCHA elements that are only configured in the browser.
So Evan, I'm also using the reCAPTCHA flow from the GitHub to put it on my screen flow. So you know how you have to add the variable for the site key, and so that's going to essentially be visible to people, right? How?
That is correct. It's in the screen flow, people can get to it.
How have you hidden it?
I have not hidden it.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I have not found a way to hide that, no.
Do you think it's risky? I mean, what's the risk of them knowing the site key?
I mean, that would give you access to your Google reCAPTCHA configuration,
Hmm.
at least to call that API. Or it needs to be found in your flow. Yeah, there's definitely more to consider here. Like I said, especially using those third-party solutions, they're not always concerned about security, and you probably should be. So finding ways to, I think there's a huge opportunity here to like truly create something that will prevent a denial of service attack. I don't believe that exists in a totally robust way right now. So anybody who has a app development company, this is a need in the community, I think. Any other questions?
I guess just overall, after this whole exercise, do you feel more confident in just the way that the screen flows for user input can work for organizations as far as security?
So it does reassure me that I tried, you know, because before all this, all I could say was, I think it's pretty secure.
Yeah.
But now I at least have this story to tell that like I incentivized the internet to try to hack my site and they could not get contact details, at least that they shared with me.
Mm.
So that's probably worth something. Again, I don't think that means it's impossible. I haven't really proven anything, but I attempted, and that's better than what I could say a month ago.
Yeah.
Why didn't you use Sandbox?
This was a Trailhead Playground. So it's not a live production org that has like real customer data in it. It's a spun up but essentially equivalent to a production order. Yeah.
So back
Any
to back to your first lesson learned about it not being ethical to hack a site that isn't yours. Like, did Salesforce express any unhappiness? I mean, whose site is it? Is it Salesforce's site?
Yeah, Salesforce owns all the technology. They did not say like take it down, or like I didn't get a cease and desist or anything, but I probably don't want to encourage other people to do this, you know, for all the reasons that the like people in the security world pointed out, that there are trusted bug bounty programs where like this is a thing that you can do and set it up the right way, and it's not like such a public just request for data and send it to me. Like it's a trustworthy system and process for that. That's where I should have been. I didn't know about any of that. So if I was ever going to do this again, I would definitely try to figure out, is there already a bug bounty program that Salesforce supports? How can we get plugged into that conversation and try to test some of these other scenarios?
Live and learn.
Yes. Yep, no major problems at the moment. It was a fun exercise. It was cool to get all the engagement. Thank you for being here to learn some of these lessons. I will send out this recording to everybody. You have access to this slide deck. Thank you for joining and going on this journey with me. I'm sure at some point there'll be an update and we'll talk about this again, because security is a lifelong pursuit. And there's always more we can do to try to make things secure for our sites. Thank you. It's lovely to see you.
Bye.
I'll stop the recording.